Montmartre is a district in Paris known for its artistic history, iconic Basilica of the Sacré-Cœur, and its charming cobblestone streets. I, however, knew this place from a movie that I love. As I turned the corner to Rue Foyatier, there it was. It was one of the best fight scenes ever from the John Wick series.
John, what time is sunrise?
2, maybe 3 minutes.
I need you to get to the top of those stairs, John.
I can say for sure they both have insane fitness levels. The elevation of the stairs is steep, much steeper than most in Malaysia, and with my questionable stamina, I found it extremely difficult just walking up. After the staircase, we explored the other sections of the Sacré-Cœur area. We were also immediately greeted by con artists, which I assume are gypsies based on what I read online. So they are there with some charity signature support forms, and as you touch the pen, they immediately start demanding money. They then act dumb, as if they suddenly forget they speak any language and instead start making funny sounds, like monkeys on the hunt. The best thing to do is never touch the pen, just smile and walk off, or if they still persist, then reply them in Bahasa, and they should leave you alone. The Basilica of Sacré-Cœur de Montmartre, or as it's often called Sacré-Cœur, is a Roman Catholic church and minor basilica. It was proposed by Félix Fournier, the Bishop of Nantes, in 1870. He attributed the defeat of France to Prussia due to the moral decline of the country since the French Revolution, and proposed a new Parisian church dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. The term Sacred Heart is usually used to describe God's boundless and passionate love of mankind. This would be put to the test during the Paris Commune massacre in Montmartre several years later. The construction began in 1875 and was finally completed in 1914, but officially consecrated in 1919 after World War I. The construction costs, estimated at 7 million francs, came entirely from private donors. In modern times, this would be close to 3 billion euros. The arches of the facade are decorated with 2 equestrian statues of French national saints, Joan of Arc and King St. Louis IX, both built in bronze. The square beneath the church was renamed after a famous French anarchist, Louise Michel, who was referred to as the Red Virgin. She introduced the black flag, which is one of the prominent symbols for anarchism today. She was a teacher, a true feminist, and was also a member of First International, or the International Working Men's Association. The organisation was not only male-dominated, it even showed an anti-feminist image, at least in its first years. The Proudhonist leaders in France were strongly opposed to paid work for women, and even any female activity outside the household, which is quite clearly in opposition to contemporary feminism. Being a Caucasian woman or a child back then meant they more or less had the same rights as an African slave, which sucked, but she didn't care. She forced the men into submission. After France's defeat in 1871, the country held elections and a hard-right government took control. Many ordinary citizens were angry for various reasons, but mainly because the rich and the bourgeoisie were living their lives in opulence and splendour, while the rest were heavily taxed and struggling in poverty. Ironically, over 150 years later in 2025, the wealth gap in France and Europe pretty much looks the same to me as it did back then, and they still are blaming immigration for their wealth distribution issues. Karl Marx described the president Adolphe Thiers as that monstrous gnome who charmed the French bourgeoisie for almost half a century because he is the most consummate intellectual expression of their own class corruption. So the Parisians decided to take matters into their own hands. They occupied the hill, and then Thiers instructed the army to take it back by any means necessary. Nobody expected what would happen next. Louise Michel, who was 41 years of age then, sprang into action when she heard news of the army coming. She immediately ordered the men to ring the church bells. She then gathered around 200 people, mostly women with guns, and then they charged towards the army of 3,000 men who secured the top of the hill when she ran to rally her crew. She wrote, "We ran up at the double, knowing that at the top was an army in battle formation. We expected to die for liberty. All womankind was at our side. I don't know how." General Lecomte, who was in charge of the soldiers, ordered his troops to fire, but the men refused the first 2 times, and the soldiers mutinied against the general, dropped their arms and embraced the mob and then celebrated after. Then in 2004, the mayor of Paris decided to rename the square after Louise Michel from the previous artist Adolphe Willet, who was said to be anti-Semitic, which is pretty ridiculous as he also shouted "Long live the devil" during the consecration of the church. We know that the actual roots of anti-Semitism in Europe has been distorted and hidden, so a simple narrative of good versus evil could be established. To me, it sounds like Willet didn't hate the Jews like Henry Ford did. He just took the piss, like Shakespeare did in The Merchant of Venice. Émile Zola wrote sarcastically in 1898, "France is guilty, it must do penitence. Penitence for what? For the revolution? For a century of free speech and science? An emancipated reason? For that they built this gigantic landmark that Paris can see from all of its streets and cannot be seen without feeling misunderstood and injured.